Intelligent High School Debate.
Hello and welcome to Intelligence High School Debate. I'm your host, Seongnam. It's said that confidence is not the result of having the answer to everything, but the result of being able to embrace all the different types of viewpoints. And I hope that our 8 students competing today will be able to consider all the differing perspectives and eventually turn the tables in their favor. Now on this program, we follow the British parliamentary style of debate, so let's first check out its rules.
This tournament adapts the British parliamentary style. The debate consists of 4 teams of 2 speakers with 2 teams on either side of the case. Each speaker should deliver a 5-minute speech, and teams gain points individually even if on the same side. The first and last minute of each speech is protected from the point of information.
Time now to meet our students. Teams and sides are chosen by drawing lots, so each team please randomly select a scroll. It will have your team position written on it. First up are the students from Dongducheon Foreign Language High School, students Kim Se-jin and Lee Jun-hwa. Their scroll reads, Opening Opposition. Next are Seongnam Foreign Language High School students Kang Soo-min and Lee So-min. They've chosen Closing Opposition. Continuing on, Gimcheon High School students So Kyung-un and Jung Yoon-jae. They've selected Closing Government. And that, of course, means that Anyang Foreign Language High School students Lee Hyun-soo and Kim Soo-min will be arguing for the motion with the position Opening Government.
Just because let me prove, however, based on how it is, we are not saying that we omit, like all other countries, like ears or mouth. We need to consume both and
However, 18% of global warming is
why do we have to impose syntax on all kinds of meat? All kinds of meat. If meat is actually
Those were your 8 students. Time now to meet our 3 adjudicators. First, best-selling author Cho Seung-yeon. And we're also joined by Michael Dunn from England, former #1 ranked speaker of the World Universities Debating Championships. And Professor Joshua Park, member of the Executive Committee of the World Schools Debating Championships. And last but not least, we're also joined by 50 audience judges right here in the studio. They will turn their green lights on when they feel persuaded by a speaker. Okay, enough from me. Let's check out the motion for today's debate.
A sin tax is an excise tax specifically levied on certain goods deemed harmful to society, such as alcohol, tobacco, and gambling. Then shouldn't we also have to pay more to purchase foods that cause animal suffering and pollute the planet? But the problem is, the burden of the tax is likely to fall heavily on the poor. What is subject to sin tax, and will it really change consumer behavior and the world for the better? This House would impose a sin tax on the purchase of all meat products.
It's hard to deny that excessive meat consumption is detrimental to the environment. So what can be done about it? Would an excise tax imposed on the purchase of all meat products reduce its consumption and the environmental damage that goes along with it?
The students are given only 30 minutes to prepare for their speeches, and that fierce debate is about to begin.
Let's hear from our students. They've had 30 minutes to prepare their case. First, the Prime Minister.
Ladies and gentlemen, on today's motion, this House would impose a sin tax on the purchase of all meat products. We government strongly believe today's motion to be passed on the stance that it is the government's duty to practice the policies that can benefit the society in the long term. But before moving on to our arguments, I would like to set the boundaries of today's debate. First of all, we define sin tax as a tax specifically added on certain goods deemed harmful to the society, and in today's case, all meat products. And second, we define imposing tax as increasing tax to a certain degree approved by the Food Safety Office. So now, moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we government have 2 major arguments to prove in today's debate. First is about the air pollution, and second is about the effectiveness to all stakes. So presenting the first argument, I would like to talk about how sin tax on meat products can help our consistently raised concern, which is pollution. Mr. Speaker, let me firstly prove how meat is fatal, how it is massively pollutes the air. To keep every livestock, to raise them and to feed them, we need surrounding environments, obviously, which is land. However, this land is not just land, it is massive amount of land. So giving an example of one of the most consumed meat, which is beef, to keep a cow to produce those kind of beefs, that we eat in our daily lives, it is 28 times larger than we produce. It needs land 28 times larger than we produce pork or chickens, 11 times more of water, and 5 times more in greenhouse gas exhaustion. To produce 1 kilogram of beef, 1 kilogram of beef, we need 43,000 liters of water, which can accommodate 660 people of having a shower. Yes.
We also know the significance of this problem right now, but can this only imposing sin tax can actually solve the fundamental problem of this?
The fundamental problem of imposing a sin tax, we say the government wants to improve the air pollution situation, which is actually consistently being raised by the nation. Because these kind of cows, these kind of livestock, they have a detrimental harm to the environment, which is actually air pollution, and we believe that this sin tax will actually help reducing these air pollution problems. So moving on, the greenhouse gas and those animals produce, and the animal amount of land that they take away, it is much more serious than most of us think, and we believe it is the government's duty to inform this seriousness to the citizens. Then I would like to prove how this sin tax can aid in reducing our fundamental goal. It can help in our society in 2 ways. First is the case when this policy becomes effective. As I mentioned before, pollution caused by producing these kind of meat products are huge. They go up to 30% of greenhouse gas exhaustion when including the whole process of producing the meat. And when sin tax policy on meat becomes effective, and the result which the government seeks to get, which is people consuming less amount of meat, we say all the animals being raised will gradually reduce, leading to amounts of greenhouse gas and the land being used also being reduced. And furthermore, the social trend of not having a non-meat diet will also be made. Next, thinking of when people will still consume meat. When people still consume meat, regardless of the increased price of meat, the tax which is additionally added will be received by the government. As our utmost goal is to reduce pollution, government can afford these monies to make more campaigns, make more commercials, and also use the money to make and develop research or study to provide people with much healthier diet. And also, not only these additional efforts by the government can also be helpful. When government use this tax to make organizations educating professions to reduce the overall pollution problem, we believe that this policy imposing this sin tax is effective, can be effective in any way. So ladies and gentlemen, we're not trying to say that all policy can give a dramatic effect. We are looking for a long-term benefit for the society, when the people can actually consume a healthier diet, where the people can actually live in a society with less greenhouse gas. Therefore, we say today's policy must be passed, and I'm really proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, that was the Prime Minister arguing for the motion, so arguing that an excise tax, a sin tax, should be imposed on the purchase of all meat products. One of her reasoning was that raising livestock and processing meat leads to significant air pollution. Let's see how many lights have been turned on for the Prime Minister. 26 out of 50. Well done. We now move on to the Leader of Opposition. Please step forward to the podium.
Honorable adjudicators and fellow audience, I am the Leader of Opposition. The motion before the House today is this House would impose a sin tax on the purchase of all meat products. The Leader of Opposition would like to highlight the term sin tax. Sin tax are levied on certain goods that cause damage to the society for the purpose to decrease the demand. However, the examples that I will give you now of examples of products that these sin tax are levied on are products like alcohol, cigarette, and horse riding. What they have in common is that alcohol, for example, they increase the crime rates, and they also cause mental health to consumers of alcohol. Cigarette also causes health issues to the smokers, and they also have addiction problems. Horse riding can lead to gambling problems. As I have proposed, all of these three examples cause harm to the society. However, meat does not. First of all, now moving on to the rebuttals from the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister addressed two main points. Firstly, she mentioned the benefit to the society, which will decrease air pollution. She has mentioned that growing these livestock requires large amounts of land. However, it is the same for crops. When you have to grow rice, which can be a substitute for the meat that we consume, they also need large amounts of land and water. Also, she mentioned the effectiveness of meat, of imposing sin tax on meat purchase. She said that when we impose sin tax on these meat purchases, then there will be less amount of meat and less pollution. However, there will be corporations that still need these meats, and these will still contribute largely to the pollution and to the society. So, now the leader of opposition would like to focus on two main arguments. First, we believe that eating meat is not a sin. Humans are omnivorous species. Like all other species, like monkeys or bears or mouse, we need to consume both meat and vegetables. Concerning the bioethics, which is the ethical questions that arise in relationships among life technology in areas like animal experiments, it is inevitable for human beings to consume meat. And also, these scientists in these areas, they still admit that even with the scientific developments continue, humans still need to consume meat. And what other substitutes do you have for these for the nutrition that is provided in these meats? B12, which is a nutrition that is in meats, it is mandatory for consumption of all human beings. Yes, ma'am.
In my speech, I gave you specific examples of how these meats can actually harm the air environment. Then can you still say that meat does not give harm to the environment?
Meat, of course, they give harm to the environment, but it is the same for crops. What other substitutes do you have for crops then? Can we still live without consuming any sorts of nutrition? That is my point here. So moving on, what we also want to say is that this can be a nanny state for the government to impose this kind of policy. It is too overprotective, and it is interfering with the personal choice that the population wants to make. So the second argument that the leader of opposition would like to present is the economic burden that can be led to the poor people. They are already in, the meat is already relatively expensive compared to other products. If we impose sin tax in these meat products, then poor people will have to pay more money, and they won't be able to consume the nutrition that is needed from these meat. Also, it is wrong to firstly impose these taxes on the consumers of meat, because in the first place, it is the government's duty to impose tax on the people who are causing sin. The people who have caused these sins are the producers. They are the ones who have unethically produced these meat products, not the consumers. The consumers have only done wrong is went to the markets and bought the meat products that they will need for their dinner or for any kind of consumption that they really want to do. So therefore, these are the reasons why, due to the ethical and economic reasons, the leader of opposition believes that this House should not impose sin tax to the purchase of all meat products. Thank you.
Okay, that was a leader of opposition arguing against the motion, so arguing that a sin tax should not be imposed on the purchase of all meat products. One of her reasoning was that it's questionable whether meat causes harm to the society in the same way that tobacco, alcohol, and horse riding does. So how persuasive was her speech? 23 out of 50, a bit less than the Prime Minister, but well done nonetheless. We continue on with the government side, the Deputy Prime Minister.
Ladies and gentlemen, as everyone here knows, global warming is becoming intense and intense every day, and the environment is getting destroyed every day. Then we, as the responsible citizen of this world, of this universe, we know that we should protect the world. And it is our duty to reduce the purchase of meat products since it harms humans in many ways. According to economic principles, we know that demand and price are in the relationship of inverse proportion. Therefore, when tax, which leads to higher price, is imposed, demand will be lowered, which will result in low consume and supply for meat. By this basic principle, we can proudly say that this policy of imposing a sin tax on the purchase of meat product will 100% achieve its ultimate goal of decreasing the amount of meat consumption. Before I move on to our team's second argument, I'd like to first make some rebuttals about the previous speaker of the opening opposition. The previous speaker stated that the sin tax only makes the decrease to the consumption, and unlike cigarette and other alcohols, meat does not cause harm. However, ladies and gentlemen, as we previously stated on the previous speaker, we say that the meat causes too much harm to human. For example, it causes cancers to human, and also it destroys the environment in the huge amount and range. Also, the previous speaker have stated that eating meat is not a sin. We should both compose meat and vegetable. However, Mr. Speaker, we are not saying that we will ban the consumption of meat. We are not going to make people not eat the meat at all. We're just trying to make the people decrease the consumption of meat. We should remember that this policy is not forcing all citizens to be a vegetarian, but we are encouraging them to move a little bit more to the smart food consuming regarding the climate change. Lastly, the previous speaker have stated that the poor people should pay more money by this policy, and therefore this policy is bad. However, ladies and gentlemen, we say that the water and the environment saved by this can benefit all the humans and all human beings and animals in the world. And also the tax that goes to the government by this policy will benefit because this can be used in many welfares or other things that can help the poor people. Now I'd like to move on to our team's second argument. Low consumption of meat can benefit every aspect of society, and it has a huge effectiveness to the sustainable development of this world too. We can divide this area in three parts. First of all, the environment. As our previous speaker have already mentioned, it can benefit the environment since CO2 emitted will be decreased and the water consumed will be decreased. It can save the earth and water, and this kind of things that are saved by this policy will be used in other parts. No, thank you. And the second part we can mention is humans. Low consumption of meat will benefit the health of all human beings in the world. WHO of this world have announced that the meat is a dangerous thing because it causes cancer. It has a stronger impact more than the alcohol and cigarette that we all know as a dangerous thing that we should not consume in this world. No, thank you. Therefore, if we spend more on vegetables and other foods that can make nutrition to ourselves rather than meat, we can benefit our health and make a smarter choice that can benefit all parts of and constitution of this world. And thirdly, we can mention the part about animals. Animals are murdered and killed in vicious ways in order to make the meat consumption for people. Since the consumption of meat is increased, animals are sacrificing more and more, yes?
Do you think that it's actually murdering animals if we're omnivores?
Yes, what we are trying to say in this point is that since animals cannot choose will they get murdered or will they get eaten by people or not, we are sure that they didn't choose their selection of getting killed by people. People should kill more and more, and since nowadays people are consuming meat more and more than before, more and more animals are getting murdered and killed, and they are getting sacrificed, ladies and gentlemen. This is called sacrifice, not a thing we did give them any selection or not. Therefore, by these rebuttals and these reasons, we proudly say that this team, the opening government, take the high ground on benefits to all compositions of the world and sustainable development of the world. We are so proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, that was the Deputy Prime Minister, you may step down, arguing for the motion and in laying out the reasons why a sin tax should be imposed on the purchase of all meat products. She cited the inverse relationship between demand and price, emphasizing that sin tax will be successful in decreasing meat consumption. Let's count the number of green lights for the Deputy Prime Minister. 40 out of 50, putting the total for the opening government at 66 out of 100. Okay, moving on to the opposition bench, the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Honorable judges and audience, I am the Deputy Leader of Opposition, and I would firstly like to restate the arguments from the previous speaker, Leader of Opposition. Firstly, she addressed that eating meat is not a sin. Humans are counted as omnivorous species, which means that we consume both meat and vegetables, just like the bears or the monkeys. And all scientists all say that it is inevitable for the people to not consume the meat because there's a name for this nutrition named B12. If we don't consume this kind of nutrition, which is only in the meat, if we don't consume this kind of nutrition, we will get some illness from it. Also, to support this argument, I would like to say that imposing the sin tax on purchasing the meat production is a nanny state, which means nanny state means that the government is too much Yes, sir.
We are saying about like over consuming the meat, not consuming the meat. What do you think about it?
But however, what do you think about the poor people? The meat is already more expensive when compared to the vegetables, and if we put more sin tax on it, it will be hard for them to consume all those kind of meats. So the poor people will be relatively harsh in the environment of consuming the meat. And sorry. Now the second argument that she addressed was to exercise the sin tax over all meat production might cause the economical burden. Just like I said, the poor people might not get those kind of nutritions. And she also said that sin tax should be imposed on the producers, not the consumers, because consumers are just the buyers, not the producers who slaughter the pigs or the meat. To support this argument, I would like to insist that not all the production of meat should be imposed sin tax, because there might be some of the places that make the meat in ethical ways. In this kind of view, the meat that was produced in ethical ways are not wrong. They're not crime, but imposing sin tax on them is considered wrong. And now I would like to move on to the yes, ma'am.
Then are you not knowing the fact that not only the process of killing the animals to make a meat, but the process of feeding them and the process of themselves emitting gases while they're living does not impact the world?
So are you saying that feeding the animals and making them to produce the gas is a sin or is a crime?
We're saying that both destroys the environment.
Oh, but I will say that in my argument. And now I would like to move on to the rebuttals to the opening government. And the first one is that they said the meat causes cancers. But just like I said, meat is needed. We need to consume the B12 or else we will get the illness. If the B12 is only inside the meat and we just need to eat them. And secondly, they also said about the environmental problems, which is in my third argument. So now I, Deputy Leader of Opposition, would like to focus on the two main arguments. The first one is that I would like to suggest two E's. The first E is the environmental problem, and the second E is the effectiveness. And about the environmental problem, well, I consider that meat products are not the major problems. Well, when you see the humans, it is scientifically...
Why, sir?
Sorry. It is scientifically defined that, of course, the cows who fart, they make the harmful gas to the environment, but they're not the major problems. If you want to talk about the environmental problems, we should reduce the we should reduce the purchase of vehicles, not the meat products which we need to consume. Well, cars are also considered the most harmful thing that makes the carbon dioxide harmful to the ozone layer, and moving on to the next argument, putting sin tax on the meat is indirectly causing the demand and purchase to decrease, and this might not be effective which means that it is ineffective. For example, the corporations, they will do the calculate to make their own benefits, and if they think that they produce more of them without caring about the sin tax, this means that they will produce more and more meat, ignoring the sin tax, because it will just still give them more benefits. So, in conclusion, according to the environmental reasons and effectiveness, this House should not impose the sin tax on the purchase of all meat products. Thank you.
Okay, that was the Deputy Leader of Opposition arguing against the motion, so arguing that a sin tax should not be imposed on the purchase of all meat products. And in his argument, he gave the nutrition logic, saying that certain essential nutrients can only be found in meat products. So let's see how persuasive his speech was. The number is 8 out of 50, putting the total for the opening opposition at 31 out of 100. Okay, that concludes the top half of today's debate. Before we continue, I would like to ask our three adjudicators on how they saw the debate so far. Cho Seung-yeon.
Madam Prime Minister, I see that you feel so bad for the animals that you are crying. The only trouble I have with that is that you are doing it through the whole speech. So when you want to use pathos as an arm, you want to use it selectively. The Deputy Prime Minister, when you use vague words like overconsumption, you have to make sure that people understand what you're talking about. And you also have to make sure that people know that you know what you're talking about. And then people are like, oh, yeah, we could reduce that. When you use these words that have multiple meanings, you have to make sure that you define it very clearly so that everybody's on the same page.
So, for opening opposition, first, I think you guys make a very good case for this being unfair. I think where you guys could improve a little bit is that you sometimes undermine the quality of your main arguments by other arguments that are just less good, frankly. So, for example, you give us a list of other things that we ban, alcohol, cigarettes, horseback riding. They might fall off the horse, but fundamentally, I think it's a different category of thing. I think there's just a missing link here. So I think there are some very strong arguments in there, which I think you can concentrate on more by getting rid of some of these other arguments that are either less developed or ultimately are just going to work less well for you.
So opening half debate, I would point out three things. Number one, make sure that your underlying analysis fits with the label that you present for your arguments. Make sure that that works together to form a cohesive argument. It did appear not only in your speeches, but throughout various speeches in the course of the debate. Secondly, make sure that your stance is consistent within each other. The way you frame it must sound consistent, otherwise it does lose a bit of persuasiveness. Thirdly, make sure that engagement, not necessarily with the worst arguments or the easiest things to rebut, but the strongest, most important arguments will make your case itself and your side of the case sound much stronger.
Thank you for your feedback. We now move on to the closing half, and to start us off, the Member of Government.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the member of the government. Although the opposition team had made some interesting points, I do not agree with them in 2 points. First of all, they talked about how crop and meat is equal. I agree that crop and meat, both of them take our land away, but they are different in terms of air pollution. Those crops give us fresh air. However, meat gives us air pollution. So that is the difference between them. And second, as the second speaker told us, I wonder how we can kill an animal ethically. I bet no one can kill an animal ethically because those animals do not want to be killed. They do not want to be slaughtered. But then how can you kill an animal ethically? That was the question that I came up with those kinds of people. Now, back onto my speech. Our team in today's debate is not saying that we should limit and we should not let people have any consumption. We are not saying that consuming is the problem. We are saying that over-consuming is the problem. Obviously, we are omnivores, as the opposition said, and because we are omnivores, it is right and we need to consume meat. But in current days, we are over-consuming, and that is no thank you, and that is the problem. And because we are over-consuming, there are many problems that comes with this. And what I want to empathize is that for animals and for environment, the earth, and for our health, we need to reduce the meat consumptions. I bet most of us sitting here do not know how much we consume meat.
Yeah, why, sir?
No, thank you. According to some research papers, in 2012, 27 billion pounds of meat was consumed only in McDonald's. And in 2015, 38 billion pounds of meat was consumed only in McDonald's. And if we think about other like fast food things and all those kinds of restaurants in the world, then that is a huge number. And the statistics that gave, and I just told you that about the 2012 and 2015. From that data, we can know that not only the number is very huge, the number is also increasing very rapidly. And we need to be cautious and conscious about this problem. Where would this kind of meat come from? They come from cows. And these cows, you know what? They generate methane gas. And what's interesting about methane gas is that they are 20 times stronger than that of CO2. We know that CO2 is very harmful, and we all know that we have to ride all the kind of public transportation, and we need to recycle and all that kind of things. But that methane gas, yes, ma'am.
What substitution do you have for the nutrition that is provided from meat?
I'm not saying that we have to substitute the nutrition from meat, but we are saying that since we are over-consuming, we do not need that much nutrition, and we can reduce the nutrition. So from methane gas, the Earth's problem is very serious, and so since the methane gas has significant
point of information.
No, thank you. Significant harm to our Earth. That is the reason why I'm insisting this. The opposition team said that there are many problems that generates global warming, such as cars and things. But according to research, 12% of the global warming was generated from whole transportation in the world. However, 18% of global warming was generated by only meat. So, no matter how no matter how hard we try, and no matter how much we use those kinds of public transportation, and no matter how much we recycle, if we keep on eating the meat at these circumstances, and we keep on eating meat just like we are doing today, then there will be no use of this kind of effort, and the world is going to be seriously damaged. So, what I want to insist is that we need to prohibit the overconsumption, not consumption, but overconsumption. And to do so, we can make the price go higher. And by doing so, we can prohibit the overconsumption, and then we can use that kind of money for those kinds of environmental problems. And that is the reason why I am proud to propose. Thank you for listening.
Okay, that was a member of government arguing for a sin tax, and in his argument, he highlighted the detrimental effects of methane gas, which is emitted from livestock. And he also reiterated that he is trying to minimize the overconsumption, not consumption itself. So let's see the number of green lights. 37 out of 50. Well done. We move on to the member of opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we had a wonderful debate over the given motion. But throughout the whole debate, however, we, the closing opposition, found many flaws in the government's arguments and saw that the opening opposition's arguments needed to be further extended as well. Today, as a member of the opposition, I would like to point out these points and explain in depth why we need to oppose to the given motion. First, I would like to point out the flaws in the government's arguments. What they mainly talked about is the environmental effect that this policy will have. They said that by imposing this kind of tax, we can solve air pollution and global warming based on some kind of assumption that by increasing the cost of meat a bit will have a big impact, and people will suddenly suddenly buy less meat by this single policy. But however, they did not present objective statistics and possible objective proof on how this will impact our society. And the government and the opening opposition, especially the first speaker, mainly talked about beef only, how beef has a big impact on this kind of global warming and air pollution. But they actually defined the motion as all meats. And why do we have to why do we have to impose the sin tax on all kinds of beef, all kinds of meat, if beef is actually one of the main problems? Why do we have to make pork and chicken more expensive? This is a point that they had wrong. And the second point that they made is that they kept saying that this will have a long-term positive effect onto the environment. But don't people have to actually acknowledge and feel that this is a problem, that meat consumption is excessive, not be forced to make choices of what they want to eat? And I will further explain this on my first argument.
Point of information.
Also, what they said is that it will benefit the humans, the overall health of humans. However, we disagree because For the rich, it will have less impact because the rich has enough money to provide food for themselves, so they won't be actually, there won't be a big impact on them with this policy. And for the poor, they will gain less nutrition because they will have less access to meat consumption. Therefore, their argument does not stand. And they kept saying that killing animals is some kind of murder and is some kind of ethical problem. But we believe that because as we kept saying, we are omnivores, and we need this kind of nutrition from meat. And they didn't answer to this question clearly. Another point that they said is that,
ma'am?
yes?
We have previously stated that this policy is not banning the whole consumption and nutrition of meat. We are just saying that we are decreasing the consumption of meat by this policy.
Then if you are actually if you're actually trying to solve the excessive consumption of meat, why are you disagreeing with the killing of animals itself? You the government side kept saying that it's an ethical problem to kill. Then why is it okay to eat? That doesn't make any sense. It's a paradox itself. No, thank you. So these are the points that they had wrong. Now I will go on and extend our opposition side's arguments. This tax increase will not change the fundamental problem of excessive meat consumption. Yes, consumption may decrease because of higher cost of meat, but it will not change the recognition of meat among individuals. People are forced to buy less, and they decry the higher costs, but they do not actually think that they should buy less for their better health or environment. What the government wants, the message they want to send to the citizens, is telling everyone indirectly that meat consumption is negative, right? But if people do not learn this because they are forced to buy less, not voluntarily consuming less meat for their own good, can we say that the government is doing an effective job of teaching citizens what is better for them? We believe that this is a problem.
POI, ma'am?
Yes?
Then are you neglecting the whole duty of government to proceed and think about improving the whole health of the citizens?
No, I am not. But as I am going to explain further on, we are going to say that it's not right for the government to intervene in one's freedom of choice to eat something that they want. Also, another point that we want to extend is the unfairness for the poverty. With the imposed tax, the accessibility of meat for the wealthy will not change. It may not even influence their lives because they have the money to pay for the extra tax imposed. However, for the poor that doesn't have enough money, even in the status quo, they will not have enough meat consumption. And because of this, they will not gain the nutrition that they still lack. Therefore, this is a problem. Another point we want to extend is the government does not have the right to intervene with the individual's choice regarding essentials in life. Some people may say that if meat negatively affects people's lives, why is it bad to impose tax on meat, just like alcohol, cigarette, and gambling? Let me tell you the difference. Alcohol, cigarette, and gambling aren't essentials of life. We can live without them. So if it's additional factors that harm people's life, then it's justifiable for the government to limit them. But eating meat is something essential in our lives. So this is not something that the government should force on them. This is something that we need to do based on our freedom, just like sleeping. The government can't say that we should sleep less or sleep more just for the sake of our health, but they can't, for the same reason, they can't limit us eating. Thank you for listening.
Okay, that was a member of opposition arguing against a sin tax because, among other things, it will place unfair and undue burden on the poor. So how persuasive was her speech? Let's find out. 32 out of 50. Okay, time already for the last speaker of the government bench, the government whip.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is a government whip, and it's really an honor for me to participate in this debate. And we strongly insist that the government should impose the sin tax on the purchase of meat products. Sin tax is the money that government gets from people with matters that gives negative impact to the whole society. And more important thing is that the purpose of this is not only to punish, but also getting some financial help for solving the common problem. Before going into my speech, I'll get some of the rebuttals. We can summarize the opposition stance into two reasons. First, meat is needed. But we are saying that we are not limiting the consumption, but we are saying that we are limiting the overconsumption. And second, they keep saying that meat does not harm environment, and I will talk about that later. Then now, I'll summarize our government stance into three main reasons. First, about environmental problems. To raise cows and pigs that people enjoy. No, thank you. That process makes so many negative impacts to our society or environment happens. So especially cows. Because cows are the biggest point that are making the impact to the environment. I'm saying about that. 38 billion pounds of cows are consumed in McDonald's.
Sir?
No, cows are ruminants. Ruminants naturally make a lot of carbon dioxide and methane gas and just flew them away to air. And I once did a research about ruminants, about reducing the gas in school. And do you know why I'm shocked? No, thank you. Methane gas that cows are making has 20 times more negative impact than carbon dioxide. Do you know why I'm secondly double shocked? That's because research for those problems were at so poor level. You know why? It's because that problem makes no money. It's the research about the environment. No, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So no one know which cow from which farm made how much gases. To this extent, here's the second reason. We call circumstances as a non-point sources in earth science terms. No, thank you. Here, one rebuttal from the Prime Minister, from the opposition team said, here the cigarettes and alcohol make specific harm, and that makes them know who did wrong, but this kind of thing, no thank you, that makes, it doesn't mean that it doesn't make harm, but it is not just revealed. So someone can say that they made a low impact to the society, but others can confess they made a huge impact, huge bad impacts to society. But ladies and gentlemen, the most important thing is whatever they say, we are in the same field, ladies and gentlemen, and we have an obligation and opportunity to strive for finding a solution to send down this beautiful blue pearl as the earth down to our descendants.
Point of information.
No, thank you. We can use this taxation for making deep research and making alternatives to meat, so reduce negative impacts from meat consuming, and plus people could eat less meat. Lastly, people buy meat from markets, but we already talked a lot about them. And people also consumes, so we are now going to talk about people consuming the meat in the restaurants. So you can think of a solution that restaurants getting thin taxation for overless meat, then it could help people. Okay.
If you want to impose sin tax on the restaurants, then the restaurant owners will have less economic.
Okay, I'll explain about that. So we can think of the solution that restaurants getting thin taxation again for the overleft meat that consumers were making. Then it could help people consume at the right level and also lessen the financial impact to the restaurants. All right. So remember, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the same globe. So with that in mind, if we cannot or do not strive for solving the problem, frankly speaking, unfortunately, no one can. Thank you for listening.
Okay, that was the government whip arguing for the motion, so arguing that a sin tax should be imposed on the purchase of all meat products. And in laying out his case, he stressed the greater harm of methane over carbon dioxide on the environment. Let's count the number of green lights. 26 out of 50. Okay. We move on to the last speaker of today's debate, the opposition whip. Please step forward to the podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, we also argue that we should solve these problems that the meat industry has brought out until now. Water pollution, loss of biodiversity, global warming, yes, we already know. We wish to solve it too, however, not with this policy today, not by imposing a sin tax today, ladies and gentlemen. So as the closing opposition, we not only supplemented the opening opposition by coming up with further issues such as economy and inequality, but all that the government team did today was to give out examples, numbers, scientific data, CO2, and on and on. We know the significance already. We have the same goal of solving environmental issues, but not with this policy, and that's what we wanted to do today. So instead of all those data about scientific areas and how much global warming is important, we wanted to hear answers about
about these questions. First of all, is this policy effective enough? Second of all, can the government's action be justified if the citizens do not want it? And third, can it solve the fundamental problem that people have about lacking recognition? And fourth, why all meat? Why do we need to impose sin tax on all meat? They never answered and gave us an objective and specific answer to all these four core questions. So under this idea now, we would like to move on to further rebuttals. Well, the government's team main goal was to decrease the amount of meat consumption. Yes, that's really true. If we impose sin tax, meat will definitely decrease. Meat consumption will. But by just decreasing a little amount of consumption, how are we going to make the earth greener? Like, how are we going to make our air pollution? How are we going to reduce the actual amount of air pollution? We think that there's no actual proof and no objective data about this. And also, we need to look at our reality now. And
Yes, ma'am. Then are you ignoring the realistic and the official announcement made by WHO, which tells us that nearly 30% of emissions of the world is caused by animals and their emissions and feeding?
No, we're not going against this idea, but just decreasing of the amount of meat consumption will not tackle the fundamental problem that this has about the people's recognition. And it's not a long-term solution, because just by decreasing a little bit won't actually turn the people's thinking out as a result. And we need to look at a bigger picture, ladies and gentlemen. Also, they talked about cancer, that this could actually help the health of the people, but people have the right to control over their own health care, and the government's intervention isn't actually justified in this. And also, they talked about animals, that we are actually sacrificing these animals. But if we look through our history and the ecosystem, it's inevitable to kill an animal for our survival. So we think that this question isn't actually relevant to this debate topic today. But we believe that the way of people growing cows and treating them is the thing that is wrong. So if you really want to reduce the sacrifice of animals, you should think about those things. Like, if that method of earning meat does not change, then this sin tax will have no meaning at the first time.
Point of information, ma'am.
No, thank you. And also, they said that this policy could benefit the society on the long term. But why is it a long-term solution if the people do not change? And does it give out any actual benefit to the society if the people keep on thinking that they don't want this? And even the poor are suffering, not unable to earn what they want to eat. And we asked them as a POI, do you think that this policy would actually fix the fundamental problem? But they didn't actually give us an actual answer. They just said that it will improve their air pollution. And if the people do not want their taxes to be used in campaigns and providing education, then we believe that the government has no right to intervene in the lives of the people. Also, the government said that their goal is to prohibit the over-consuming of meat. But what's the actual standard between over-consuming and just consuming? The government never gave us an objective idea. They just argue that we are going to do a good job as a government taking care of the citizens, while they are actually justifying that it's okay to take the right of the people to save the government's money and the cash. And also, we also said that meat is a different concept compared to alcohol and tobacco, because it's an essential nutrition that we need as a human being. It's hard to get a balanced diet without any meat, and we, the opposition, clearly explained this special characteristic that meat has, while the government did not answer to it. Because of this characteristic, we believe that we need to come up with other better ways. Justifying the intervention of the government is wrong, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, the government bench has planned a world where the lawmakers control our lives, even the most basic things that we have on our tables every day called food. And we believe that a world where the government worries about money losses rather than the equality and the freedom of the citizens without any clear justification. So, ladies and gentlemen, in order to actually fix this problem in a right way, we believe that we should come up with better solutions and better policies, not this policy of imposing the sin tax. Thank you.
Okay, that was the opposition whip arguing against the motion. And one of the points raised was that raising public awareness should come first, and that raising awareness would be more effective in protecting the environment than imposing this sin tax. Let's count the number of green lights for the last speaker. 31. That puts the total for the closing opposition at 63, same as the closing government. Okay, all 8 speakers have presented their case for and against the motion. While our adjudicators are making their final decisions, let's first ask our audience judges on how they saw the debate so far. Audience judges, if you agree with the government bench, if you agree with the motion, please turn your lights on. If you disagree with the motion, please leave it off. On the count of 3, please make your decision. 1, 2, 3. 22 for and 28 against. So it looks like the majority of our audience agree with the opposition bench. Okay, let's hear from our adjudicators. Cho Seung-yeon?
Closing government team. By far, among the 4 teams, your team has the most Korean-sounding English, and I congratulate you on being able to express yourself clearly, even if your English pronunciation was limited. But the compliment will end there. You say that at McDonald's alone, 38 billion pounds of meat is consumed, right? Somebody's going to ask those questions like, oh, that's not a lot. There's 7 billion people in the world. It's like 5 pounds per person. Numbers are two-edged swords. It cuts both ways, right? It can help you, but if you don't know how to use them, the sword flies right back at you, and it hits you.
So closing opposition, I have 3 things to talk about. Number 1, I think maybe you were a little bit put off or caught off guard with a lot of the numbers that ended up coming out in closing government. And you responded in 2 ways. So you have to, I guess, question why they're not objective or not trustworthy statistics, as opposed to just saying we can't trust those numbers. Obviously, we're not in a scientific conference, but under these circumstances, you don't want to brush aside things that do sound like objective data coming out. Okay. Number 2. You did come out and go along the lines of, well, you're not really solving the fundamental problem. The problem setting was, 1, environmental harms. It almost seemed as though you were conceding a large portion of those things and setting up a separate problem that you're saying we're not really resolving. And then finally, thirdly, in terms of extensions, if you're in a closing half, and I know BP debating is very new for many of us in Korea, when opening opposition is raising arguments, and you want to extend them a certain way, you need to make sure how it is that you need to make sure to convey how it is that you're different from them.
So I think this debate suffered at times from a lack of engagement. So I think both sides were kind of talking about their own thing, not necessarily engaging with the other side's thing, engaging with why it might be bad for the environment or why it might not be, engaging with why that unfairness is something that we can ultimately stomach. Then the question becomes, which was the team that sold their thing best? Which was the team that had the clarity, the consistency of message, the passion, the focus, the lack of contradiction, the clarity to really hammer their point home? Because on the engagement between the different points, I think everyone was to a certain extent talking past one another. So that's what we looked for when selecting today's winner.
Thank you for your insight. Now it's time for me to announce the winning team of today's debate. This team will go on to the final round for a chance to represent Korea in the 2017 Asian Cup. And that team is Anyang Foreign Language High School. Congratulations. You look genuinely surprised.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you for the good result. Oh my gosh, I was so nervous during the whole debate. Oh my gosh, thank you. I'll try my best at the final round. Thank you.
Well, we are surprised with the result because today's competition was quite fierce, and we also find some of the mistakes of our own speeches.
Right.
But we are so happy to receive this result, and we'll also try our best on our next round too. Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today. The grand finale will take place next week, so please do join us again. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.